more other partners and sponsors along the line. We're in conversation with Ion Software, where we are asking them for license, also for PDF generator licenses here and there. So I believe this is going to be a wonderful session. And thanks to Kanaya for joining us today on this first meetup.net Nigeria community. Thank you so much. I'm going to give the floor to him now to basically walk us through how to design enterprise multi-tenant system using .NET. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So, good evening, everyone. So, is my screen is visible?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Yeah. So, good evening, everyone. So, first of all, thank you to everyone, and especially Babu Dunde for inviting me to present this session. I really appreciate for this opportunity with this, to present the Nigeria community to share some practical insight of multi-tenant application in enterprise. So before starting presentation, I am setting some my context. So multi-tenancy is one of the best topic, sounds stateful and first one application to many customers. For example, we have a one application and we can give that access to the multi-customer and that all customer have a separate isolated database. So it is a multi-tenant software application. So let me share my screen and go through that PPT. I have prepared that. Is my PPT showing to you?
Yes, your PowerPoint is showing. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so let me introduce first myself. I am Kenya Katarman. So I am a CTO and software architect in a Digicon like company private limited. So I have a total 50 years of experience in a multiple domain like FMCG, fintech, especially SaaS-based application, healthcare, and insurance, and as well as e-commerce platform. So totally, I have delivered more than 50 applications from that scratch. So based on that, my experience, I will teach you how to create the multi-tenant application, especially in that SaaS-based application. So before that, setting the agenda, so I will introduce about what is a multi-tenant application, what is a type of tenant, single, multi, what is the cost benefit, what are the implementation approach, how to find the strategy of that identifier of that multi-tenant. Then we will discuss security and isolate of database. And I will show you the real-time demo of that application with help of .NET Core, C# in .NET Framework 10 with PostgreSQL. And then we will final with that for FNQ. Whenever you have any question, you can raise that hand in the meeting. Okay. So first, what is the multi-tenant application? You can see that there one example of that Gmail. So Gmail is providing email service to multiple clients. So that we have to give our multiple tenants. Suppose if one company has purchasing license from that Gmail, so you can log in with your ID and you can see only their data, not other tenant data. And we have to and if I give you one example, what is the multi-tenant? Suppose you have a one dedicated house. So if you have a one dedicated house, you have to maintain, we have to limit its scalability, you have to maintain more cost what single house. Suppose if you go with that one type of building, there are multiple compartment. So we can save the maintenance cost, lower cost, and high scalability, and ideally it is a help for that SaaS based application. So you can see that diagram. So if the one is left hand side is a dedicated stack and second is shared infrastructure stack. So suppose multiple customer has sharing one infrastructure, so you can save the infrastructure cost, scalability. And if you update anything in one software, you don't want to deploy for every application, because we are creating one infrastructure and one application with support to all customer. So that's why we saving the cost. It is high scalability and ideal for using for the SaaS application. So there are three type of architecture in that multi-tenant. So one is a simple plain vanilla type. one database and one application. So suppose you have a one customer, you want to deploy that application, so you will create a database for that customer and you deploy that web application for that one customer. Suppose example, you one new customer has come and they want data isolated, so we have to create again one database and one application. And again third customer come, you again will create a new database and you host a new application. Suppose after that there is some bug, some one bug come, so you have to fix that bug and you have to redeploy this application to three times. So that is a problem with that shared database. So so there's a single database. So first is shared database. What you will do, you will create one database for all customer. So it is a shared database and one application. Second is a database per tenant. So you have one application. Here is one application, and each database, each customer have a separate database. So one application with multiple database. So if you want to change something in application, you have to do only just once. And third one is each instance equal to each database. So some of the bank or some HIPAA compliant healthcare, they want a dedicated database as per their government compliance. So for that, we have to choose third option where each database for each customer and each application, there is 100% isolation level in the infrastructure. So these are three type of the multi-tenant database model. So in that first, we will check that if suppose we have deployed one e-commerce application and we have a 4 customer. So what we have to do, we have to create one more column called tenant ID. So, and each tenant ID, each record, we have to save the tenant ID of that customer. Suppose we have a 2 customer, one customer called tenant A and tenant B, and we are sharing the database, shared database model. So suppose if we have a 10 or 20 columns or 20 tables, so each table we have to create one more column called tenant ID. Based on that tenant ID, we have to show data and save data. So each record have a dedicated tenant ID in a column. So whenever new tenant come, so it is easily onboarding that new tenant because we don't need to change anything database or we don't need to deploy any application. Just we will save that fresh tenant ID in that new record. So it is a shared based database. And the second is customer want dedicated database, but customer want to deploy application on single web host. So you can see that diagram. We have only deploy one application, but database is different. So suppose a customer having own data in this first database, customer B, tenant B has a own database and tenant C own database. So this is second strategy. There is plus and minus in the strategy. Suppose if you want to change something in the database column, you have to deploy at 3 places. But in that first model, you no need to maintain any different database column for different customer. If you change at one place, it will reflect for all customer. But in that dedicated database with same application, if suppose you introduce one new column called XYZ, so you have to alter this table into 3 databases. So there is some cons and pros is that each database have a own database. So we don't have to risk of that sharing the data. But in that first case, we have to make sure that tenant B cannot see data of tenant A. So in this case, we have to write a where clause in all table. But in that second case, the data is already different in the database. And third option is each application has each database, like the general case. So normally a new customer come, we will deploy the new application in that own web application and we'll get the database. This is a classic example of that each instance with the in table. Correct? And you can see that complex speed and onboarding process. So I have created that diagram with that 3 color. The blue part is that state database, orange part is that database per tenant, and that gray part is a tenant per database. So we can see that in that state database, all tenants have a same database. So very high cost efficiency and 1 DB and one shared resource. And in this case, the onboarding is very easily. If suppose a new customer comes, you don't need to change anything. So here is cost effective and fast onboarding. But you can see in that orange color database per tenant, uh, the each tenant have a own DB but share the same web application, and it is a balance the cost. It is not higher or not lower, it is a balance. But in that first case we have optimized the cost. And third version is instance per tenant. So in this case you can see the data isolation is a very high because it is a separate database and separate web application, but it is also complex because if someone has changed the some column, you have to maintain this change request for the all database. Is for example, if you have 100 customer or 100 tenant, so think about that. If you change one column, you have to alter that in the 100 place. And if suppose your developer has missed that one place, it is very complex to find out that what the issue. So this is a chart. Based on that chart, we can create the model based on that customer requirement. So now we have clear what is the multi-tenant. Anyone have a question about that? What is the multi-tenant? So I can proceed. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
So
Maybe
anyone have a question till now? Okay. Okay. So now we understood that what is the multi-tenant and what are the type of multi-tenant. First we see that shared database. Second is a dedicated database, and third is a dedicated database with a dedicated application. Now we have one challenge because application is same, web URL is also same. How we find that this is a different customer? Suppose if I give you one example, there is two store are selling online the product, and we have same application and shared database. How to identify the this user is belong to this tenant? So there are five type of strategy come. So based on that strategy, we can implement that code for implementing the tenant-based application. So one is a subdomain. So we can tell that customer to type the subdomain name like abcstore.ecommerce.com. So based on that subdomain name, we can identify, okay, hey, this is come from this tenant domain. Second is path base. So in that path base, we have to enter the domain name or tenant name after the slash. Third strategy, we can send the tenant ID in every request of the HTTP header. Third one, after the login in that JWT token, we will inject a tenant ID in that JWT token. And fifth is we can pass the tenant ID in the query parameter. So I don't recommend the fifth option, but there is five type of identifier of a strategy of tenant ID. So in the demo, I go with that tenant header ID because most of the application using the tenant ID strategy using the header, but we can implement using that five way. So in the demo, I will show you one example about that product. So suppose that you have one e-commerce application and you want to populate a product list based on that tenant. So we will go with that header-based tenant identification, and each column, each table of one column have a tenant ID. So we will save the tenant ID in each column. And we are using a .NET entity framework core. So when you create a database context model, we will write globally filter call has a query filter e equal to e.tenid, and we will pass that tenid. I will show you in that live code, but we have to make sure that every request have a tenant ID, and we have to apply a global level filter where customer will see only that data, not other tenant data. So global level, we have to configure this entity framework model. Okay, so what is the process? We will start with that model. We will create, go with the chat DB, and I will show you both example. Each customer have a own DB, or we will create a shared DB. So I will show you both case in that one demo. So we will go with that shared DB and DB per tenant request, and we will apply the global level filter. So whenever your request come, the automatically where will be injected during the global level filter. So no need to write developer to don't need to write a developer to write where filter in all requests. So we will write in that global level. So all requests by default will apply that where global level. And for that tenant identification, we will use subdomain. So normally this platform are using that multi-tenant. One example is SaaS. SaaS application will create multi-tenant strategy. Cloud native product example Azure or AWS is also a tenant-based application. Multiple tenant are using the same application, and Amazon are maintaining that multi-tenant strategy. So most of the B2B application also doing a multi-tenant. Subscription-based application like Shopify also doing a tenant-based application. So in my demo, I will show you the code. My tech stack should be the .NET core. I will use that PostgreSQL. And for that demo, I will go with that Swagger to show that insert and get operation, and I will use entity framework. So in my approach, I will go with that set database, and every request I have to pass tenant ID in each request. So in the demo, my goal is to secure data so no one can see other tenant database. And I will deploy the application with single DB, a single application with multi-DB. So my design flow, I will create one tenant identification, will extract a tenant from request, and I will write the middleware to get the tenant ID from that request header. So I will create one tenant entity. So tenant entity have a tenant name, tenant ID, and a database connection string. If the customer want a isolate database, and each entity have a tenant ID column. So client will send the request with tenant ID. Middleware will resolve that tenant, and we will store this tenant in tenant context, and in our all service and DB context, we will apply that where of the tenant ID. Okay, so let me stop and I will go with that code. So is my screen visible to you?
Yes.
Okay. So I already created one demo. So I will already uploaded this code on GitHub. So end of the presentation, I will share the PPT, and also I will share the source code of the link. So this is my trend application. So you can see I am using entity framework. Okay, for the API document, I am using Open API, and for testing the API, I am using a Swagger. So in connection string, I have created one database. Let me open that Postgre database. So you can see I have one database called multi-tenant app. So in that table, I have a three table, product table where user will save the product list. Second is tenant. So I want to save the customer name and customer ID into tenant table. And this is a table for EF migration. So let me open the code again. So first I will go with that model. So this is my first entity named tenant. So tenant have a ID, name, and connection string. Connection string is optional because some customer want application with shared database, and some customer may want dedicated database for that application. So that's why I'm keep as a optional. So ID is identifier. We will assign one each tenant have a unique ID and that name of that tenant ID. So we will use the ID and name. One is table called product. So we will in that demo we will show the we'll save the product and we'll fetch that product. So product have a ID, name, and tenant. So I created one interface called I must have a tenant, and this have a tenant ID identification. So our each model will inherit that column called tenant ID, because as we need that, if we want to share the database to multiple tenant, we mandatory have to implement that tenant ID. So that's why I created that interface, and we have to implement that interface into our product entity. So is this clear to everyone, or anyone have a question till now?
I think you should continue. I think maybe any question can come at the end of the session.
Okay, definitely.
Thank you.
So this is our entity. This is our application setting. Then I will go with that program file. So I am using controller and endpoint explorer. I have implemented Open API to expose the document of that API. Then I have created one middleware called tenant resolver. So what I do when any request come to our controller, before that I am checking what is the inside, what is the parameter of the tenant ID. So I already said that we will use the header based tenant identification strategy. So that's why in every request I am checking what is the value of tenant ID. So I am extracting tenant ID from the request order. Then I am setting the tenant ID from this header. So let me open this tenant resolver. So what I do, I will check in the tenant table, is requested tenant is present or not in a tenant database. If suppose someone is sending a random tenant name, so I will throw exception and will show you that tenant is invalid. If tenant are present in database, and tenant has a dedicated connection string, so I will configure that connection string in that tenant service. So let me again show you that my table. So in that tenant table, you can see that tenant ID, tenant name, and connection string. If the connection string is null, then we are using a shared database. So all customer have one database. If we are passing the any connection string for the tenant, we will use the separate connection string for that tenant. So we are this way we are handling both two cases. Each tenant have each database, or one shared database to multi-tenant. So in that program file, I have registered dependency injection, I tenant service. We already go through with this service. Then we have created two database contexts, one for app database context. So in this, we have a product table, okay, and one is tenant DB context. So in the tenant DB context, we have only tenant entity. So we have created two app contexts. One is app DB context, where we have included product table, and one is tenant DB context for tenant management. Suppose if you want to create that any tenant, we will use that tenant DB context. So in AppDB context, you can see that we will already register the tenant service, correct? So based on tenant service, we will change the connection on that row, on the dynamically. So whenever request come to controller, before that controller, we are extracting the tenant ID, and we are configure connection string based on that tenant. So we will receive the connection string here in the AppDB context, and we have created global level filter. When anyone will query from product table, we will register the where clause in the tenant ID equal to current tenant ID. So we are extracting the tenant ID from that current tenant service. And when anyone want to save any data, so we have overrated save changes, because after that after saving in entity framework, we have to write saved changes. So in that save changes, I have overridden that save changes, and in this I am checking if that entity has a inherited I must tenant, then I will add updated that entity tenant equal to current tenant. So we don't need to save a tenant id in each service, because in global level I already registered the workloads, and while saving and modifying, in both case I am updating the tenant id based on that middleware. Now we can go with that controller. So for in that tenant controller I just created one endpoint for that create new tenant. So I will run this code and show you the what inside that tenant. So right now you can see there is only one tenant register, Kanaya. I will create new tenant. So this is Swagger. So first we'll check with the tenant. Suppose if your new customer come, we'll create a new tenant for that customer. So suppose that new customer name is Manish and identifier also Manish. And suppose if customer want separate database, we will pass isolate true. And suppose if your customer wants share DB, we will type here false. So before sending device, let's check that what's written in controller. So we have injected that tenant service, and we will pass this data ID name and isolated true or false. We are passing false, and in that service, so in that service we will check that if isolate is true. If the true, we will create new database, we will create a new connection string, and we will migrate that our table entity framework, and we will migrate the all table in that new database, and we will save the tenant information in that save changes. If the isolate is false, so we will create tenant ID, tenant name, and we will connection string we will set as a null, because we want a separate set database. So two cases written. So in first case, we are we are creating tenant with a isolate false. So when I create that tenant, so tenant is created, and I can show you the database. So Manish is created, and name is Manish, and connection string is null. If the connection string is null, then this is a shared database tenant. So now we will go through with that product table, product. So you can see the product table. So product have ID, name, and tenant ID. Now, when I try to fetch data with random tenant ID, and you know we have implemented if you passing a tenant ID and if tenant is not present in the database, we will send that exception. Okay, so you will get exception, tenant is invalid. And if you pass the tenant ID as a money, you will get data, but it is empty because we haven't saved anything in that tenant. So let go through the code of that product. So we have a product controller. So you can see there is three method: get, post, and delete. In that get, we have injected that FDB context, and we are sending product list. So here we haven't write anything about that where I want this because we already register in that FDB context. So automatically global filter will be applied during that runtime. So here is simple code. Just I am returning that product list, and in that entity FDB context we have written a filter. So automatically filter will apply when we pass that to list. When we'll try to create product, we are sending just name, correct, and id will generate by auto id, and we are not passing here like this tenant ID like this. Because in that same method, we already written that based on that header, we we already attaching the tenant ID. If the entity is inherit with that, I must have a tenant, and you know already the product ID inheriting that I must tenant ID. If the your entity has implemented that I must tenant ID, we dynamically inject the tenant name during the saving. So when you time to save changes, it automatically will save the tenant ID. Let me undo. Now let me save the one create one tenant. Sorry, product. So in that money tenant, I want to create one product called product one. Execute. Okay, so one product is created. Let me open the database, and here is I will try to open the query. So you can see the product name and 10 ID monies. So this 10 IDs is automatically injected during the save changes. Now let me fetch the data of the monies. So you can see that one record is getting from that database. Now one more example. I want to save the tenant in separate database. So what I do here, I will give one example called Sagar, and here I want separate database for that tenant. So let me first check how many databases are available in the Postgre. Just give 1 second. So in this case, if we configure isolate true, in this case, the system will create a separate database for just the Sagar tenant, and all data of retrieval or save will be stored in the separate database. So whenever we'll create this request, that time automatically database will create, and table will also will create using that migration script. Okay, so you can see that we have only two table, correct? This is our main table, multi-tenant app, and Postgre database already created by that Postgre. So now I am creating new tenant with isolate true. So in this case, new database will be created. When I will execute, so it will internally it will create a new database, and all our migration script will be applied into that Sagar table. So you can see you will get that ID name and dynamic connection string. So if I open this my database, first you will see that new database is created with desk of tenant. So whenever now you will create any data for that Sagar tenant, it will store in only Sagar database, not our main table. So this means each tenant have a own dedicated database. So let's show the example of Sagar. So right now I'm trying to fetch data from Sagar tenant. So you know that no data. Now when I create new data for Sagar tenant, product 123. So now in this case, runtime the data will be runtime connection string will be configured for data Sagar DB, and data will be show in that save in that Sagar tenant. Let me refresh here. When we'll open the Sagar, so you can see that our product table and migration table. So in the Sagar tenant, we have isolated the data, and you can see just only one data in that Sagar. So that means Sagar has a own isolated data, because in this case we have a configured isolated data. Now again, if I create one more product, my old Kanya tenant. Okay, so a new product called 123 created with the Kanya tenant, and Kanya tenant is saved as a shared DB. So now let's look the how data is look in that Postgre. So when I query that Sagar tenant, it's coming only one data. But when I open our main database, so you can see that in this database, Kanaya and Manish is sharing the data in that single DB. But when you try to fetch data and saving that time, you will see only the tenant data, isolated data, not the other data. Correct? So this is a two example. I show you separate DB for separate tenant and shared DB for multiple tenant. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you have. Yes, you are.
Okay. Let me share my PPT again. Just give me 1 second. Okay. So okay, so I show you that example of that multi-tenant and single tenant, and I uploaded a code in my GitHub. If you want to download that code, here is the code. Let me paste in this uh, chat. So anyone want to download this code, go to this link and type the email ID. You will get the source code, and you can try to run this example in your code. And let me show a step of the migration. Okay, so whenever you want to run the demo, create a migration for that first app context, and then apply this app context DB migration, and then you create a migration script for that tenant DB, and then you can apply this migration of that tenant DB context, and after that you can run the code. Okay, so now anyone have a question about this?
Yeah, I think there is a question. If you can check the chat. So there is a question there. How do you perform an operation that needs to read data from different sources?
Okay, question is about that. How do you perform a operation that need to read data from different source? So I guess you asked question, and let me share again the how to read the data. Okay, Okay, so first share the database schema. So, mm, okay, so for each tenant, we have a connection string, correct? Suppose if your tenant is from different database, so while creating the tenant, you have to configure that database connection string for that each tenant. One example, if suppose one hospital want database to be saved in that their premises, so we have to tell that customer to create the database in your premises and share that database connection string, and you have to configure here. So whenever whenever request come, our middleware will configure the connection string based on that request tenant. Is that clear, Uthman?
Utman, is that clear? Is that clear? The explanation? Yeah, okay, okay.
Okay.
So if anyone have any other questions, please you can talk about it now. You can raise it. Uh,
Hi, Babatunde.
thank you. Yeah, if you have a question, you can basically ask.
Okay, so my name is Olatunde, and thanks for organizing this type of forum where different .NET developers can learn and gain experience from, you know, some of the challenges that you have actually faced. My own question is based on when you were explaining the different databases for the data sources, like the shared databases, and the like you mentioned, like three. So my question is based on the advantages and the disadvantages of the different databases. Like, what are the, in terms of costing, in terms of scalability, can you enlighten us on, which one is better, and at what point do we need to use these different data basis? Thank you.
Okay. So your question is about the scalability and cost. So I
Yes.
show you the three example, right? So so one is shared database, correct? So in this first case, the all data you have into one database. So and you have only one application. So in this case, you will save the cost of that database instance and app instance. So, if you say about that costing, first is a very high efficiency, sorry, it is very low cost in the infrastructure because code is the same and data is also same. If you have a 50 record in three case, the data is same, correct? So cost for saving data is same, but the infrastructure cost is very low in that first case. It's called shared database. The problem is in the set database, you have to maintain the where clause in every request. For example, if your developer has forgot to write where clause in the global filter, so might be one tenant maybe see the other database, correct? So little bit security risks in that first case, but as compared to cost, it is a very safe cost. In that second, you have to pay a cost of that database, but you are getting a benefit that data is isolated in that separate db. So security is very less, but cost is little bit high. So it is a balanced approach. So and third is each app have a each app instance and app database. So here you are paying a high cost, but you are getting a dedicated app and dedicated database, because some of the company like banking domain and healthcare domain, if you go us, there is HIPAA compliance. So in that law HIPAA compliant, you have to save the data as a dedicated server. No need to share the database. So based on that compliance, some of the people choose the third option. If you are in that banking domain and healthcare domain, you have to go with the third option, because first and second is not possible, because that app is sharing to multiple tenants. So based on that customer requirement and approach, you have to go with that approach. So these three all are scalable, but there are some cost about that complexity, and you can save the cost if you go with that first option and second option. So right now there is not one answer of what is the best. Based on that use case, based on that requirement and what are the domain, you can go with that option. If you have a small application like form builder or some short URL, like, then you can go with that first option. If you need little bit more data isolate security, go with that too. And if your domain is a very government involvement, then you have to go with that third option, because in that government area, each state wants separate DB or separate app instance. So that time you will go with that third option. So all three are scalable, but there is if you are getting one benefit, of course you will get the complexity of that security. I already show you the graph. If you want low cost, you have to maintain security. If you want to balance approach with cost, you go with that per tenant. And if your organization want some more security and compliance, then you go with that per tenant database.
Thank you for that. I think that explain it. Uh, you should know what you're actually building. Depending on that, that will let you know which approach you should actually take. There is one other question. Uh, there's one other question.
Okay, let me read. From your demo, if I am interested with this UI, how do you identify the source of their middleware to map to the right tenant database? Example, how you will be UI inject correct tenant ID. Okay, so let me share a screen again. Okay, so I show you this five strategy of how to identify that tenant ID. So generally in that enterprise, I see that everyone is using a header-based approach, but we have five options. So if your web application opening a application using acme.yourapp.com, so using that JavaScript, you can fetch that domain name, and you have to pass that subdomain name into the X tenant header ID using that Ajax form. And you can the second approach, you can find the header from that URI path also. So whenever you sending any request to server of the .NET API, first your JavaScript application or Ajax application or React or Angular, you have to fetch the tenant identification using this five approach, and each API you have to send the tenant ID. If suppose you are not sending tenant ID, you will get 500 error. So that's why I check that if the tenant present in database. Otherwise, I will raise the error that tenant not found.
Yeah, I think that's explain it. Um, if there is no other question, there's no other question on the chat.
Yeah. Anyone have a question? Yeah.
I think
Someone.
yeah, Utsman, you can go now. I think you raise your hand if you have any question. Yeah, please.
Yeah, yeah. Please confirm if you can hear me clearly.
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. So firstly, I want to say a very big thank you, to the host for putting everyone together here. I'm sure we've been able to learn a lot about how .NET works, how the web works, and how to build our SaaS app. It's an added advantage, for the newcomers, the experienced, and even the senior developers here. So thank you very much. Now, my question goes to the I actually have two questions, right? The first one has to do with the setup for the um instance per tenant, right? The truth is I have actually been quite curious of multi-tenancy apps. So I've actually followed up a lot with it, and some of the challenges I have faced, um, I've been able to get, a lot of clarity from the presentation today. So that's a very big thank you. But the part of instance per tenant, that part is still a bit unclear. I don't know if you could just walk me through that again. And then secondly, is in scenarios where, for instance, I know for every single multi-tenant application, right, most likely there is a super admin that oversees every operation, right? Meaning there is a super admin who has authority to disable a tenant, to suspend a tenant and oversee the entire application. And that in short means there will be instances, right, where there needs to be more of like an aggregation or a dashboard or an analytics on every single tenant. For instance, to say overall downtime of databases of all the tenants, or overall tenants on the system, or overall users, in tenants, or overall products in the system. For instances like that, that would mean we need to pull the data from not just one tenant, but we need to kind of do like an aggregation of all the data in the entire system. The question would be, what would be the advisory or recommendation for features like this, given each tenant has its own unique database, right? So that's all. So two questions. The first one was more of like a walkthrough on the isolation instance per tenant, right? And the second one was how more of like a guide on how to go about multi-tenancy queries.
Okay, so first go with your first question. Let me share screen again. Okay, so in that third model, instance per tenant, correct? So in this case, the only big enterprise like government or banking, they are using this type of infrastructure, correct? So in this create, you have to deploy your application in their instance. So first you have to create a one tenant, correct? Call that bank name, and no other tenant are available in that tenant. So each customer we have to deploy this third three. Suppose you have three customer, correct? And they three customer want separate tenant and separate app instance. So you have to create three web instance. You have to deploy three applications in that web instance, or in that web instance you have to create one more each tenant called root tenant. So this A instance have a 1 DB with one tenant, and no other tenant we have to insert. So, and for that second DB, you have to again deploy application. You have to create one database for B tenant, and you have to create only one tenant. So each app have only one tenant, and each app have a separate instance for these three customers. So what we do, we will deploy our web application at three places: A place, B place, three place. Then we will create database as three place: A place, B place, and three place. When you are running the first application, you will create one tenant called root. Only one tenant in that application. So this is a method where same our code, same DB will deploy for these three applications. But if you want to change anything in that A database, then you have to maintain that change request for that each customer. Suppose customer A wants some different table, but B don't want. So you have to maintain three repository and three database changes request. So first, is this clear?
Yes, it is. Thank you. It's very
Okay.
clear.
Okay. Now third question. Suppose you want. Suppose there is three state of government: A government, B government, and third government. Correct. So they have a own data in that three different database. Now your question is, you want some data dashboard to see a aggregated data. Okay, so in that for that you have to create one more database called reporting database, and using that RabbitMQ or event driven approach, you have to save data. Suppose whenever someone has created product in a table, that time you have to write one more record in that common shared database, and using that shared database you can see just dashboard purposing. So for reporting purpose you create one more database, and whenever some transaction happen in that database, you have to replicate that product into our shared database for reporting for data privacy. Because you cannot you cannot runtime query aggregate to three place. Suppose a place is in Canada, B is in US, three is in India. So if you tie runtime query into three database and then you are populating one output, it will take more time. So best approach is create one more database called report server or analytics server, or whenever someone has changes in a table, you will insert data in that second DB using event driven approach or RabbitMQ approach.
Yeah, that is noted. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for question. Michael, correct?
Yeah, I think Michael, you have your hand raised. Please, can you go ahead?
Yeah, you're correct. Thank you very much for taking your time to do this walkthrough. Just a little bit of just a question from me. I'm not sure if I missed this, so pardon me if you've covered it before. Um, how do you handle cases where you have to deal with multiple DB providers? So I say that the example is more tailored around Postgres, but if you have a client that says, I want this to be on MySQL, I want this to be on um, MSQL Server or some other type of DB, how do you still use the same source code without
Okay,
having to do a lot of changes and then still be able
okay,
to progress
okay.
with what you have?
So in that one ERP, we got same problem, because some customer want to save in that MySQL, some customer want to save data in Postgre, some MS SQL, and we are using entity framework, correct? So we have to create three app connection setting, correct? And we have to create a migration script for this three-time migration approach called initiate. Example, when you create, let me show share screen again. Okay, so when you create the migration script, you have to create a three type of script: one for SQL, one for Postgre, and one for that MySQL or MS SQL, correct? And based on that customer, you have to apply that migration script. So when you are trying to create tenant, you have to write more code. So when you create tenant, let me run the
Think
code.
you are showing your Zoom workplace. I think you are trying to share another thing.
Uh, can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can see your screen, but it's showing the Microsoft store, not.
Let me reshare again.
Okay, please. Thank you.
Now, can you see my screen?
Yes, all good now. Thanks.
Okay. So when you try to, so this is a tenant API, this is an admin API. So this is not publicly accessible. For that demo, I have opened this API for the demo. Ideally, this request will only admin can create, correct? So you are here, you can create one more variable called database type, and you will pass that some identifier like I want MySQL, MS SQL, and when you create that tenant, you have to write a condition here. So here when you create the migration script based on that app, you have to migrate that type of SQL script or Postgres script based on that request. So here you have to write some extra code based on that logic. So we did one customer, because sometimes customer want multiple type of database schema. For that, you write extra code here. If the type is MS SQL, then you will create a MS SQL script. If you Postgre, then it will create a Postgre table. But the other thing, FDB context, this will be work same as like for all table, because you are using ORM, right? So internally, internally entity framework will handle it will create the query based on that connection tree.
Yes, I think that explains it because I think I've also um I had that issue before that we need to pass the database provider for us to know the provider to use, and we've done the setup of the DB context for all of them. So we just have to determine, okay, which one are you picking based on that.
Yeah, correct. So for that, we have to write extra logic. We have to handle the script based on that provider, and that tenant creation logic, we have to update that. For right now, we have only 45 minutes for presentation, so that's why I keep a very simple logic so everyone can understand. And the question is very enterprise level question. So might be most of people does not understand, but the question is valid.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Kanaya. I really appreciate this presentation. I've gained one or two things from this. Thank you for everyone that has taken the time to join this session today. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. There's one more question from Mohammed. Uh, Thank you for this illustration and the enlightenment. For a developer, what programming languages, including HTML and CSS, will they at least need to be familiar with for them to set up the multi-tenant system you have illustrated, sir? So if you can take that, then we can just close for today.
Okay. One question that I sent you some feedback link. So if anyone have a feedback for me, you can submit that feedback. And also, I want like to one group picture. If you anyone so if all are ready, we can switch on that camera and create one group photo. If allow.
Yes, that's fine. We can do that. Thank you so much. Please, you can drop the feedback based on the link that Kanaya have shared. You can just take a few minutes to just uh, rate it. Then if you are comfortable, you can just turn your video on just to take camera, just to take the picture. I really appreciate it. Uh, Thank you so much.
Sorry.
That's fine.
So okay, so switch on the camera and please smile on your face so I can capture this photo. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Please just um, try and take a few minutes to uh, to fill the feedback form. Like I mentioned, I don't know why this my poll is not actually working. There is a JetBrains license that was provided, but I don't know why this thing is not showing. 1 second, please. 1 second, please. Let me know if you can see my screen, please.
Yeah, I can see.
Okay. Uh, So what I'm going to do, second, don't know why this is not working. This should actually work, but I don't know. 1 second, please. 1 second, please. Where's this Zoom? My Zoom is not opening again. I think this is it. Chat. I don't know why this is not working. But I'm going to use another tool to do the wheel pin. Then, should in case it pick any one of you, I'm going to post the name of the person that the wheel pin pick on the meetup group. Uh, so if you're not following us on meetup, please you can I will drop the link. You can try to follow us. Then I will drop the link, the name of the person. Then the person can reach out to me for the JetBrain license. It's for 1 year license. It's free. You have access to a lot of things that JetBrain is actually offering. Thank you so much, everyone, for the time today to join us. Next month, we will have another session also, and we will post it on Meetup. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Please do well to keep coding. If you have any issue, you can basically reach out to Kanaya if it's related to multi-tenant application. So you can reach out to him on LinkedIn as well. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. It's wonderful to have you join us today. Thank you and bye for now.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate.